Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan Sekulow, Executive Director at the American Center for Law and Justice.
Welcome, folks. We have an interesting panel, especially after Governor Huckabee and what's coming up later today. The role of faith, life, and family in our culture and the 2012 elections. Let me introduce the panelists and we'll get right into the discussion. First, Marjorie Dannenfelser. She is the president and chairman of the board of the Susan B. Anthony list, one of its original organizers. As president, she directs the mission of the SBA list. And folks, for the pro-life community here today, you know how important the SBA list has been to electing pro-life members of Congress and legislators. Again, prior to joining the SBA list, she served on Capitol Hill as a staff director of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus. She's from North Carolina and a Duke graduate. Please welcome her. Susan B. Anthony list. Again, folks. Another major leader in the movement, Tom Minnery, who is the executive director of CitizenLink. He has led the government and public policy division since 1988. He oversees their network of 38 state-level policy councils. Prior to coming to focus on the family, Minnery was senior editor at Christianity Today magazine and a graduate of Ohio University. And also joining us, Andy Blom, the executive director of the American Principles Project, which he joined after its inception in 2009. Immediately prior to joining APP, he served as president of Hawaiian Values and as president of Research Institute for Hawaii, USA. In addition, he's got an executive background, including serving as executive director of the state affiliate for National Right to Life. So these are the individuals, of course, combined together that we can have this real discussion about what this means to our culture and how it should impact the 2012 elections. Let me set the stage, and then we're going to get right over there. You know, it's always been the left that's told all of us on the right, keep your religion out of politics. The law and the government, all three, politics, the law, the government. Keep them separate, right? But now we have a liberal president and a liberal administration just this last couple of weeks who are committed now to saying, okay, if you're not going to do it, we're going to force it on you, or at least we're going to try. And here's just a couple of examples. The last 2 weeks, they've targeted Catholic and pro-life religiously affiliated organizations, and that affects schools, hospitals. Again, folks, understand that, all because of the power granted not to Congress, but to the executive branch from one piece of legislation, Obamacare. It's not just the 2,700 pages. And now the Catholic hospitals and institutions, there may be some compromise offered. It's already not acceptable. If you did see the story today, you don't play compromise with the First Amendment of the United States. And the first freedom in the First Amendment of the United States is about freedom of religion and keeping the government out of the Catholic hospitals and telling them what they need to do. So that's part one. Part two, in this Supreme Court case you may have heard about, the Obama Department of Justice and Eric Holder, the Attorney General, sided with an employee of a religious institution so that what has been well-established precedent since 1872, it's called a ministerial exception. And it means if you're a religious institution and you hire someone like a minister or an instructor or a theology professor, and you have a specific theological standpoint that they have agreed to teach, and they refuse to do so or change, that you can terminate them or ask them to leave, and you don't have to fear lawsuits. This has been in place again since 1872. The Obama administration fought it all the way to the Supreme Court to do away with the ministerial exception. What does that mean? Religious institutions would have no protections whatsoever. They could not just say, listen to their speech, listen to what they taught in class. They were saying they don't agree with our theology anymore, and we're paying for it. That would be done away with. Now, they lost, but they didn't have to join that case. They did. So what they're doing now is saying, okay, we've told you, get out of politics, but if you're not going to do it, we're going to try and force it down your throats. So we're going to talk about that. I mean, they told us to be quiet. Don't vote your faith. Don't legislate morality. Let them legislate morality, right? They'll tell you what's right and wrong. Don't mix your faith and your politics and your religious convictions. that shouldn't affect what you really do when it comes to the government. So let's get right to the discussion with our panelists. I think you're going to find it interesting, and it seems like to all of us, the tables have certainly changed. They are now trying to do what we have refused to do. Are you going to let them get away with it or not? Let's talk about it. So I want to go right to a direct question to Marjorie because of what's happened with Planned Parenthood in the last 2 weeks. Not just the Komen Foundation issue, but also, obviously, when President Obama was told by his own vice president and former chief of staff, who are both Catholics, this is not the right thing to do, he sided with Planned Parenthood. Now, that's not a shock that he continues to side with Planned Parenthood, but even told by his own folks, his own people, his vice president and handpicked chief of staff, that this is not good right before an election, he still seems like if Planned Parenthood pushes it, he'll at least try for him. He'll at least go the distance. So when you've got that kind of issue hitting us so straightforward, why is it that this time that Planned Parenthood is flexing the muscles? Is it because of the exposure of the lawsuits? Is it because of the SBA list and electing pro-life legislators? Why is this their moment to demand everything?
I'm sure the latter is in part true, but fundamentally, in all these issues, I think we all in this room know that they're all of a piece. There is a group of people, including Planned Parenthood and this president and his staff, that behave with great conscientiousness. They act like people of conscience. They 100% believe in the principle that reproductive freedom ought to trump anything else, including religious freedom, whether it's in granting Planned Parenthood what they want, or with Planned Parenthood outrage like a petulant teenager when money gets taken away from them because they're under criminal investigation. It is all of a piece, and they are instructive to us, I think. We know where our rights emanate from. They are endowed. They're not given by government. I really think we ought to be asking the question back to the feminists and to the left, who decides? That's a question they've been asking over a long period of time on the abortion issue. Who decides? Do you trust the modern emanations of the left, or do you trust what the founders embedded in our founding documents, which was religious liberty?
I want to let both of you weigh in on this.
Yeah.
This is a huge issue, obviously, and I think what you're seeing, again, the flexing of the muscles, Komen Foundation, in the moment they've announced they're defunding it for reasons that actually make sense, regardless of your stance on abortion, but because of the issue with the mammograms and the allegations. The ACLJ, we've got a huge whistleblower, multi-million-dollar case moving through the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, not the most conservative in the world, they tried to stop it, and the Ninth Circuit said, no, this goes to trial, because we now see whistleblowers, their own accountants, doing this. But you see how fast Tom and then Andy as well, Komen, within 24 hours, they were rewriting their code, which they said Planned Parenthood was violating, so that they could justify to continue to fund Planned Parenthood. They've had board members quit, and now more people than I think ever before, not just the most informed people, realize that the Komen Foundation was funding the world's #1 abortion provider and the #1 abortion provider in the US. And Komen does great work, but now you realize, okay, why? And why would they switch so quick? How is it possible that in 24 hours Planned Parenthood can pull something like that off?
Yeah, Jordan, I am fascinated by the explanations given by the left for all of these things, and the explanation back on the HHS regulations, which seek to require contraception in healthcare programs. The explanation is that this is preventive care. Now think about that. Yeah, pregnancy is not a disease. Fertility is not a sickness. We don't need preventive care for those things. And earlier this week, there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by 3 Democrat senators, Jeanne Shaheen, Barbara Boxer, and Patty Murray. And the explanations for their side, this pro-abortion side, were just remarkable. They said, look, if back on the regulations now, if you just teach theology in your religious schools, we don't cover you. But if you want to have a broader mission into the world, then you have to abide by these regulations. In other words, if you're a Catholic teaching institution and you just teach theology, not a problem. But if you are then compelled by that theology to go into the world, then we will regulate you against your conscience. And there was a Catholic commentator who said it so well. He said, we don't go into the world because they're Catholic. We go into the world because we're Catholic. And take that back to the source. Why did God send his only begotten Son to die for our sins? Because he so loved not just the Jews, not just the Greeks, not just the Gentiles. He so loved the world. And that's the heart of John 3:16. So I think the explanations are just incredible, unbelievable, and highly remarkable.
To me, it's almost unbelievable that a president who knows people are very weary of him on this issue would push it right before an election. I mean, I think, again, it underscores to everyone listening right now that when we talk about, and we've all said it, but this proved it, the abortion industry really controlling the majority. There are some Democrats now standing up, and I applaud them, who have said, even that voted for Obamacare and said this is a huge problem, and they're criticizing the president. They're joining with Marco Rubio's legislation. That's a great thing. I want to get to a question, because Andy, I want to get to you, and then I'm going to tie it back into a few things. Because of the way your organization is set up, the American Principles Project, you're interested in the economic issues, pension reform, the gold standard, and you also marriage, religious liberty, life, the immigration issue. And we're one of those organizations, the ACLJ, we started with the First Amendment, but now we've broadened out as well. When you see these kind of issues and the way you talk about them, because it was very interesting going through all the different issues you work on, how does it all fit together? Does it all fit together? Are they all intertwined together, every one of these issues?
They all go back to basic first principles, but for this panel mentions family. All of this goes back to family. Economics goes back to family. The economy is an issue at the kitchen table, not at the high reaches of government. That's where the economy is an issue for voters. Religion is an issue at the kitchen table. Faith is an issue at the kitchen table. One of our most important projects we call Preserve Innocence, and it's about the same assault that is going on here is going on against our children in the schools, and our side has been asleep for years and years and years while a government agenda that is anti-religion, anti-capitalist, appallingly sexual is being pushed through the schools with federal government money. Okay, we have a panel coming up on that. There's your 30-second ad. But please see this, because there's things going on in our schools, and we wonder how this is happening. And every day our children are going out and being indoctrinated in this. And this is not a war against faith, it is a war between faiths. I was driving in Palo Alto a couple of years ago, and two of our better conservative radio hosts were talking about the environmentalists supporting Hillary. And one of them said, you have to understand, when they don't have a faith in God, they have to believe in something that makes them feel good. So this is an issue of faith for them.
Well said.
This is their faith, and the problem we have is they are passionate and aggressive about their faith.
Okay.
You know, it's something we've talked about, Andy. I think he just said this faith issue in this. ACLJ is not all evangelical. A lot of people think that it's just an evangelical, but actually our top attorneys, most senior attorneys on the life issue, were Catholic, and that's because they've been fighting that issue before Baptists and evangelicals really figured this out. You know, we didn't want to talk about that in our churches. And I wanted to ask the direct question to Marjorie, because of Planned Parenthood. I was not planning, folks, a month ago to talk all about Planned Parenthood, but it happened. You know, it happened right before. I wasn't planning on saying, you know, we've talked about the Obama's war on religious freedom, and I mean, this was the most severe, and now he's walking it back later today. It's not worth your time. No one's going to accept it. So I'll tell you that right now as you're seeing it in the news. But Marjorie, I want to ask you this about Planned Parenthood, so we get to some other faith issues as well. And what we've seen in all four GOP presidential candidates, they have all and this is pretty unprecedented, all 4 remaining, have pledged to defund Planned Parenthood.
That's right.
That is a major step and a major victory in itself. Because we've had plenty of pro-life presidents in the past and people, pro-life Senate, House, and that was, that was tough. And some of that's because of the Congress makeup, and every Republican is not pro-life and every Democrat's not pro-abortion. Here's the question. If one of these 4 becomes president, could they repeal the funding of Planned Parenthood in their first term? Is that possible?
Without question, they've all pledged to do so. And the only reason they could get away with not doing it, not that they would want to, would be that we are holding them accountable. And I believe that that's the difference between other elections and now. Not only a surge of opinion, not only are we talking about Planned Parenthood when we wouldn't have been a year and a half ago because of the trafficking issue, because of the incredible fraud, abuse, and waste. We're talking about all that now. And we can talk all day long. If they don't have consequences in elections, they won't have teeth after the election in the legislatures. So when we hold people accountable, like those so-called pro-life Democrats in 2010 who voted for Obamacare, who are now in private life,
sure.
Who now we're hearing they may have regretted their vote, not just because they lost, but because they realized they got sold down the river.
Right.
Accountability is everything. That's the other A word, and especially applies to the abortion issue.
When it comes to accountability, I'll say this, and Tom, I want to go straight to you. Accountability, we told everybody. People, we told about what this administration would mean. Never before have we had an administration this tied to the abortion industry. Not like this. And we said the health care law, you could read all 2,700 pages. That's not even, that's the tip of the iceberg. The administrative power here that we've seen all coming out of one piece of legislation that I'm going to get to in a second because it has, I think, ramifications on more than just life. And we'll see what the Supreme Court does. But Tom, I wanted to go to the presidential forum CitizenLink hosted. And we know the economy, it keeps getting ranked, right? It's the top issue. And Governor Huckabee was just talking about how it's important, but to say no social issues matter, well, they just picked that battle themselves. But when you're talking about to evangelical voters, working with them across the country, for all the activists here, even if you don't consider yourself part of it, but you want to elect conservatives, this is my question. Is it enough to have that choice? They're going to have a choice between President Obama's big government economic programs and a very different alternative among any of these 4 candidates. Is that enough to get people to the polls this election cycle, or do they have to specifically address the social issues that we keep being told in the exit polls? Well, that's not why people are voting that day. And that may change after this last couple of weeks. But what have you picked up through the debate, through the forum, and traveling the country working with the evangelicals?
Yeah, well, thank you. And by the way, CitizenLink is the public policy arm of Focus on the Family, and we work a lot at the grassroots level across the country, state to state, with family policy councils that are professionally run, independent organizations that we've nurtured through the years to handle issues like that. And first of all, back on Planned Parenthood, whether or not Planned Parenthood is defunded by the federal government with federal dollars, there is a growing movement led by Indiana at the state legislature level to defund Planned Parenthood state to state from getting state dollars. And that is because family policy councils are able to work in grassroots elections to improve the state legislatures. This last election in 2010 in Indiana is a case in point on the marriage issue as well. The marriage amendment, state marriage amendment defining marriage as God defined it, was held up in the Indiana House, which had a very narrow majority of Democrats. We couldn't defeat the speaker, but we could turn him into the minority leader, and that's what happened with this 2010 election. So the Republicans took over. The marriage amendment quickly passed the legislature and will be sent to the people in a year or two. But Jordan, on the issue of is economics enough? I think taxes make people angry. Taxes make people mad, but what makes people passionate are those issues of family that Andy talked about. And I must say this, there is hardly any issue that is more settled in the mind of people than the definition of marriage. 31 states now have put the definition of marriage to their voters in one form or another, and all 31 states, by an average majority of over 60%, And in politics, we call 60% a landslide. Over 60% is the average majority in those 31 states that have defined marriage as one man and one woman, and that's northern states, southern states, east and the west, even California. I'll end with this. A CNN reporter was saying, well, this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which overturned the marriage amendment in California, that only applies to California. And then the other reporter said, well, that's 39 million people. That's a whole lot of people in California. But what he did not say was most of those people rejected same-sex marriage by passing Proposition 8. So even in California, the majority opposes it. And I must say, the margin of those voting for marriage, in God's definition, were Democratic Party constituencies, African Americans, Chinese, Oriental churches from the Pacific Rim, Hispanics provided the margin of victory. So that indicates the strength of marriage as a family issue. It's settled.
You know, and they've gone after pastors there too on proposition. You know, pastors have right to speak out on issues. They're bringing them in to testify, trying to make them, you know, get on the record and say, why were you telling people that this is the right thing to do? But let's talk about Proposition 8 and what just happened in that case, Andy, because for me, and you look at this from the grassroots, and again, so many of these issues, folks, are not just about that issue, because these kind of constitutional reasonings could apply to economic issues, not just social issues. This is the start. This is the tip of the iceberg again. You look at the ruling there, and really what they keyed in on. And I'll just ask this. How many of you heard politicians say, including our own president, who says he does not yet support gay marriage, but is okay with civil unions? You've all heard this, right? He continues to say that. The court said, because California recognized civil unions and gave all of the full rights, and people have been told by politicians for years now, that's okay, we still won't have marriage. And you know what the main court reasoning was in the 2-1 decision? You can't grant every other right and then say you can't use the term. You know, it's an equal protection issue. So all of these politicians that told people it's just about, you know, the benefits, but it won't ever be marriage, including our own president, if this makes it to the Supreme Court, and that reasoning stands, those states at least, and the District of Columbia, who have given for at least civil unions, if not full rights of gay marriage, would be forced under what they did by politicians who told them, don't worry, this isn't actually going to be marriage. The effect of this now, you see the grassroots movement. This was the plan all along. This was their strategy. People bought into it, and now we've seen a court take all of it, and this gives them the reason to say, no, you can't give everything and keep one word away.
We saw this in Hawaii last year, where the effort was not to acknowledge gay marriage. It removed the word marriage from the state statutes. Everybody's relationship was a civil union. They simply eliminated marriage. They didn't give gay marriage. This has been the path, and we have a terrible problem as Christians because we keep falling victim to this incrementalism.
Sure.
They are in it for the long fight. They come back, they come back. We don't want to be mean. We don't want to say, oh, you can't visit the sick person. Oh, you can't. So you give a little, you give a little, you give a little, and then you're in the situation we're in right now. Exactly right. If the Supreme Court blesses the Ninth Circus, then believe me, if you've lived out there, these people are really bad. Okay. But if the Supreme Court blesses this, every place there's civil unions, marriage just falls like dominoes.
You know, that is so important, what you guys are dwelling on. I just want people to understand it. A lot of times on the gay marriage issue, they'll say, we just want civil unions. It's not a marriage. We want civil unions. And then some Republicans capitulate, some Democrats capitulate. And then the argument is, now we're second-class citizens. We want the title marriage, and you cannot deny that to us. You've correctly pointed out that's the legal strategy, and that's what we have seen. That's what's happening right now in the Colorado legislature.
Sure, and I'll tell you, the ACLJ as legal experts, we respect our opponents who are smart constitutional lawyers, and we have never seen a better strategy put in place than by the gay rights community.
So what's our strategy? Help us.
The strategy was people don't, just like on the Planned Parenthood issue, people don't want to believe it, and then it hits you. And this is kind of a general final question for everybody, because I want to give, and use this also as kind of make your final statement, a couple minutes to each of you, because it all ties back. I think this gets back to Obamacare, right? You tie Obamacare to a few different targets. The federal individual mandate is targeted people. This time it could be health care. If it's upheld as constitutional and not repealed, it can be anything else. Now you've got the agency regulations targeting organizations and institutions. So now you've got individuals, institutions, organizations. It's an assault on all religions. If they get away with one, predominantly affecting the Catholic faith, they will go to your faith next and your religious group next. And then they also take power away from the states to make their healthcare decisions for their citizens that best tailor to it. In some, if it's not held, again, unconstitutional or repealed, it affects individuals, organizations, institutions, companies, and, to make that more, the states. Do you think the American people are understanding the long-term effects? This is not just about health care, that this is about every issue at the personal level, the organizational level,
right,
and the faith level, and then of course the states' rights issue as well. I want you to use this each about a minute to kind of close out, because I think it all ties back. It's bigger than healthcare, and it's Planned Parenthood. They all tie right together.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, we'll start with
Without
Marjorie.
question, it's ideology trumping the principles embedded in our Constitution. The reason we became a nation, ideology trumping that all along the way. When it applies to Planned Parenthood and reproductive freedom and feminism, there is no question that the firestorm that started on the state level about Planned Parenthood is that we're working with you and other organizations to defund. So far, 8 states, $61 million from Planned Parenthood on the state level. This is happening because there is intensity. What must happen, the distance between what people believe, you can have a 60, 70, 80% opinion poll, and then you can have results at the poll. But there's a big gap in between those two places, and the way to narrow that gap is intensity.
Yeah.
The president has given us that with the clarity of who he is.
It's folks, we have 20 seconds and 20, because we're getting really close.
Okay, Jordan, just real quickly, the best evidence I see that people do understand the serious import of all of this is that the Tea Party movement is so far still a movement and not a party. One might have thought that in their disgust with the establishment, they would have gone off and formed a third party. It didn't happen. They understand that politics is difficult, sometimes disgusting, but they're hanging in there and will be a force in this big election year. That's encouraging.
Andy, sum it up for us.
Okay. So this comes down very much to a battle of what this panel is about, faith and family. And we have got to be as strong in our faith as these faithless people are in their passion. Marjorie's right, Planned Parenthood is an issue. But we have to have our faith forward in the square, not apologetically in the public square. Issue after issue, we have to be aggressive about it, we have to be proud about it. This is about values, and we cannot continue to compromise to give away small victories.
You know what, folks, and any of us, because we have a special guest joining us right now, actually, to give some remarks directly on it. I have the honor of actually introducing someone who, he's a highly respected attorney. He does oral arguments for the U.S. Supreme Court. He defends our constitutional rights. You may have figuring this out right now. You may happen to hear him on radio or television and realize it's not just about the First Amendment anymore when it comes down to the work that he does. It's just about every issue that people at CPAC care about, regardless if you consider yourself evangelical or social conservative. But most importantly, let me just tell you this. He's also a great father to me. My dad, Jay Sekulow, is the Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice. And let me just say, since I was there in 1987 when he argued his first case, of now 12 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court, let me get you up to speed very quickly about things you may not know how far it's come at the ACLJ, and how we became this force. Under the leadership of someone who was born in Brooklyn, whose grandfather was a Russian immigrant, who was raised in a Jewish home, and who, while in law school, would never be dreamed that he'd be named one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America. This is a Jewish kid from Brooklyn. By Time magazine, and the same magazine calling him a powerful counterweight to the ACLU, which happens to have a little bit bigger budget than the American Center for Law and Justice. he was also named one of the 90 greatest Washington lawyers of the last 30 years by Legal Times because of his dedication, in their own words, to fighting to expand liberties and protect civil liberties. Twice named by the National Law Journal, because I don't think people know this enough about my dad, the respect in the legal world. Twice named as the 100 most influential lawyers in the United States of America. He has had an organization he leads, the ACLJ, described by Businessweek as the leading advocacy group for religious freedom. How did he get there? Faith, prayer, and hard work. Town Hall put him in their Hall of Fame. Internationally, he's now representing Israel's position at the International Criminal Court. We've got offices around the world. We have a recognized NGO at the UN. And folks, based on the fact that most people assume he's my brother, my dad's just getting started. Please welcome the Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, our special guest, Jay Sekulow.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. He gets his height from his mother's side of the family. You know, it is great to be with you. Jordan mentioned briefly that I am the grandson of a Russian immigrant to the United States. My grandfather came through Ellis Island, left Soviet Russia because of religious persecution, learned to speak English, became a citizen about 14 years later. It took about 14 years for him to become a citizen. He was a fruit peddler in Brooklyn, New York, and his grandson gets to argue cases at the Supreme Court of the United States. You know, I call that American exceptionalism. Jordan mentioned in the panel, which was excellent, mentioned this whole situation with, and I want to address three things very quickly. When it comes to the First Amendment, it's very clear. There is no compromise with freedom of speech. There is no compromise with the free exercise of religion. There is no compromise with our ability to petition the government for a redress of a grievance. And right now, with this latest decision from HHS with regard to contraceptive services, abortifeasance, and now the administration is saying they're going to compromise. Could you imagine the founders of our country, the drafters of the First Amendment, saying, well, the government can tell the Catholic Church what they can and cannot do? That's the exact opposite of how our government was intended to be structured. You're witnessing right now, by the way, I think, in over a dozen cases at the Supreme Court of the United States, I think right now we're witnessing perhaps the greatest attack on religious liberty that we've seen. And this is way beyond the Catholic Church. This is way beyond the issues of abortion and contraception. This is the idea that the federal government can tell a religious institution, for you to operate, you must violate your conscience. Now, I will tell you, we've been litigating these conscience clause cases for decades with great success. But now it is the federal government versus the religious institutions. It's also the federal government against the states on another issue. I mentioned I'm the grandson of Russian immigrants. I believe in immigration. I would not be here today if we didn't have an immigration policy in the United States of America. I am thankful that my grandfather got on that boat at age 14 and came here. But why would the federal government, with our taxpayer dollars, sue the state of Arizona while the state of Arizona is trying to protect its citizens from illegal immigration that is causing literal drug wars on the border? They're taking our taxpayer dollars to sue the state of Arizona, and the state of Arizona is trying to defend its citizens because the federal government hasn't been able to. But the federal government has been able to operate a gun running program called Fast and Furious right out of Arizona. Again, no compromise on these issues. There's ways to work through the immigration issue. We encourage legal immigration in this country. But to sue the state of Arizona, but that's not anything new for the administration. When Indiana decided that they were not going to fund Planned Parenthood, the ACLU filed a lawsuit. No great shock. When HHS then made the decision that the ACLU was correct, a bit shocking, that the federal government is telling a state who and how they must fund a private institution. To me, I find that absolutely abhorrent to the very foundations of our freedom and from the standpoint of our republic. Our republic rests on the idea of a limited government. You know, it's an easy move to go from the situation in Indiana to Obamacare. We represent about 1/3 of the United States Congress in a series of 3 briefs before the Supreme Court of the United States. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, Congressman Ron Paul, Congressman Paul Brown, and if I gave you the old list of 119, I would take up all of my remaining time. But we represent a third of the United States Congress in the greatest power grab in our history. Can you imagine, do you think my grandfather coming over on that boat would have imagined the day where the federal government would tell him what he must buy as a cost of citizenship in the United States of America? I don't think he would have thought that that was right. And I certainly don't think the founders would. Now, we're at the Supreme Court of the United States. Well, let me tell you what that means. You know, I was never a particularly great math student, but I can count to 5. And to win cases at the Supreme Court, you've got to get 5 votes. And I'm not sure how the case is going to come out. There's a lot of issues there. As I said, we filed 3 distinct and separate briefs on this. But folks, the next president of the United States probably selects 2 Supreme Court justices. Now, I want you to put this in context. That's the Supreme Court I'm litigating in front of for the rest of my life. So many of these cases, take the partial birth abortion cases, we were talking about the abortion issue, 5-4. The challenge to the Pledge of Allegiance, it was a technical decision on standing to maintain under God and the pledge, 5-4 on the standing issue. On and on and on it goes. This election matters. And what we need to do is get into a situation where we're proud of America. And here's what I want to end with. In honor of my grandfather, Shmulik Sekulow, who fled Soviet Russia and came to Brooklyn and opened up that fruit stand, no compromise and no apology for America. Thank you very much. Thank you.